calling? What are you reporting? Hello?
On a cold December morning in 2011, the quiet town of Deer Park, Washington, awoke to an ordinary day. But inside one modest home, something unimaginable was unfolding. At 9:18 a.m., a 911 operator received a call. The line stayed open for 14 seconds. No words were spoken, only faint sounds, a short gasp, a muffled struggle, and then silence. Moments later, the call disconnected. It was a cry for help that no one could fully hear, a warning that came too late. That phone call would later become the center of a chilling murder investigation. It was traced to the home of Channon Starbuck, a 42-year-old mother of 5. In the hours that followed, life in Deer Park went on as usual. Children hurried into school. Parents dropped them off, sipping coffee and waving goodbye. But for one family, routine would soon collapse into horror. 15-year-old Logan Starbuck noticed something strange that day. His mother, Channon, hadn't replied to his morning message. She was always on time, always reliable. By the afternoon, when she still hadn't shown up to pick him and his siblings up from school, concern began to grow. At 2:45 p.m., Logan texted her again. "Where are you? Who's picking us up?" No reply. 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A text from his mom's number. "Dad, I have a headache. Stay there." Then another, "Send Marsh a note. Dad will be there in 10 minutes. But Clay, their father, never came. At that very moment, Logan didn't realize that those text messages were not sent by his mother. That evening, the family began to worry. Channon wasn't answering calls. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Packages sat unopened on her porch. Her car was still in the garage, and the house, dark and silent, showed no signs of life. The next morning, when she still hadn't appeared, her mother, Melanie, called the police for a welfare check. Officers knocked, looked through the windows, and saw nothing unusual. They left without entering. But something inside that house was terribly wrong. When they returned 2 days later with permission from the landlord, they discovered a scene so shocking it would haunt investigators for years.
Marriage and expensive divorce appear to be at the heart of a Deer Park homicide. Channon Starbuck was found strangled to death inside her home last.
Channon was found lifeless in her bedroom. She had been brutally beaten, and her body had been arranged, humiliated, in a staged, degrading manner. It was clear this was not a random act of violence. This was personal. Detective Mike Ricketts, who arrived on scene, later said he'd never seen anything so disturbing. The killer hadn't just taken her life, they'd sent a message. And that message would soon point straight towards someone who once vowed to love her. Before we go further into the darkness of this case, we need to understand who Channon Starbuck was. Born in Indiana in 1969, Channon grew up in a deeply religious home. She was quiet, kind, creative, and devoted to her family and faith. In school, she was known for her artwork. Her drawings won awards, her teachers adored her, and her friends described her as gentle but strong-willed. She later moved to Florida with her mother after her parents' divorce. Life wasn't easy, but she adapted quickly. She had a nurturing spirit, always caring for her siblings, always helping others before herself. In her early 20s, she met Clay Starbuck at a church dance. He was older, charming, confident, and unlike anyone she'd met before. Clay worked in the oil industry and traveled often for work. Within a year, they were married. At first, it seemed perfect. They moved to Alaska for his job, started a family, and had 5 children together. But behind closed doors, cracks began to show. Clay was often away for long stretches, and Channon started to feel isolated and lonely. Their faith, once a shared value, began to divide them. Channon remained deeply committed to the church, while Clay grew distant, even dismissive. And when she discovered his infidelity, the foundation of their marriage began to crumble. In 2000, after a decade together, they divorced for the first time. But their story didn't end there. A few years later, Clay convinced Channon to give him another chance. They remarried in 2006 and tried to rebuild their family. For a while, things seemed hopeful. They moved to Deer Park, Washington, a peaceful place, far from the chaos of their past. But peace didn't last. By 2010, they had separated again. The love that once held them together had turned into resentment, jealousy, and control. Court records later revealed that Channon accused Clay of monitoring her, breaking into her home, and even installing spyware on her computer. Friends recalled her saying that if anything ever happened to her, they should look at Clay first. When she enrolled in college to become a dental hygienist, Channon was finally rebuilding her life. She was doing everything right, focusing on her children, her education, her independence. But she also wanted companionship. So she began exploring online dating. That's where everything changed. One of the men she met online was Tom Walker. Their relationship was casual, flirty messages, a few dates. But shortly before her death, Tom sent her a disturbing request. He asked her to pose for a suggestive photo using a sex toy in a very specific position. She never sent the picture, and when detectives found her body, she had been positioned almost exactly like that message described. At first, Tom seemed like the obvious suspect, but his alibi was airtight. He'd been at a funeral during the time of her death. That meant someone else had staged her body in that position on purpose. Someone who wanted to frame Tom. Someone who knew about that private message. Someone who had access to Channon's computer. And there was only one person who fit that description: Clay Starbuck. When detectives first questioned Clay, he seemed calm, maybe too calm. He talked about his ex-wife's online dating life, about her bad decisions, and about how she was meeting men who might be dangerous. He even suggested one of them could have killed her. But his tone was strange. There was no grief, no confusion, only criticism. He spoke of Channon as if she were an inconvenience, not a victim. The more detectives listened, the more uneasy they became. Then came the first major break in the case: DNA results. Samples taken from under Channon's fingernails and around her neck revealed 2 male contributors. One was unknown, but the other matched the paternal line of Clay Starbuck. This meant it could only be him or one of his sons.
And now, detectives have arrested her ex-husband in connection with the murder. KXLY was the only TV station there when Clay Starbuck, seen here in handcuffs, was led into the public safety building for what turned out to be a 4-hour interrogation. Sheriff's deputies arrested Clay after DNA test results eliminated other men that Starbuck dated as suspects. Detectives have not yet listed a motive.
Investigators quickly ruled out the boys. They had solid alibis, either at work or in school during the time of the murder. That left Clay as the only viable match. The evidence was getting harder for him to explain. When asked why his DNA was found under her nails, Clay offered strange excuses. He said maybe it was from old contact, maybe from helping her fix things around the house, or maybe, he claimed, they'd been intimate again recently. But that didn't make sense. Channon had been terrified of him. Her diary proved it. In the weeks before her death, Channon had written pages describing her fear. She said lights in her home were unscrewed, furniture moved, locks tampered with. She suspected that Clay was sneaking into her house when she wasn't home. She even changed the locks and refused to give anyone a spare key, not even her children. One entry mentioned finding a gift bag on her porch. Inside was a sex toy and a handwritten note. It read, "If I can't have you, you can have this." The handwriting looked familiar. It was Clay's. Detectives also confirmed her fears about being watched. Her computer had been infected with spyware, a keystroke logger. It allowed someone to read every message she typed, every email she sent, every password she entered. Who would have a reason to install that? Only someone close to her, someone obsessed. And that obsession had a clear motive. Just weeks before Channon's death, Clay was ordered to pay over $9,000 in child support and legal fees. He was angry, broke, and bitter. Friends described him as spiraling, talking about how unfair the courts were and how Channon deserved what was coming. The timeline began to close in. On the morning of December 1st, Clay told Channon his car had broken down and asked her to take the kids to school. She agreed. She dropped them off, texted a few friends, then went home. At 9:18 a.m., she made that desperate 911 call, the one that lasted 14 seconds, the one with no words, only the sound of a struggle. After that, everything stopped. From that moment on, every text message sent from her phone was written by her killer. The messages to her kids, the ones saying, "Dad will pick you up," the ones pretending she was still alive. All of them were written by Clay. When detectives checked his phone records, they noticed something chilling. His phone had been turned off from just after 8 a.m. until 3:37 that afternoon, the exact window when Channon was killed. No calls, no texts, no movement, nothing. When asked why, Clay said he was napping. But surveillance cameras told a different story. Investigators pulled footage from roads near his house. No sign of him walking, no sign of his car breaking down. No one saw him that morning at all, and yet, by afternoon, he was back to texting, acting as if nothing had happened. When detectives confronted him with the DNA evidence, his behavior shifted. He grew defensive, hostile, and at one point even smirked. He said, "You'll never prove anything. You've got no idea what really happened." But in reality, they did. The prosecution's theory was that Clay had staged the entire day. He pretended his car had broken down, then waited for Channon to leave with the kids. When she returned home alone, he was already inside, waiting. He attacked her almost immediately, possibly during an argument. When she tried to call 911, he grabbed her phone. The line stayed open just long enough for dispatchers to capture those last 14 seconds. After killing her, he cleaned the scene, posed her body, and sent fake messages to the children. Then he turned off his phone and disappeared for hours. It was cruel, calculated, and personal. Clay Starbuck was arrested on February 6, 2012. He was charged with aggravated first-degree murder and burglary. When police arrived to take him in, he didn't resist. He smiled and he said, "You're making a mistake." But detectives had no doubts left. They had his DNA, his motive, his pattern of control, and the voice of a woman who had predicted her own death. At his trial, the courtroom was divided. On one side sat Channon's family, heartbroken but determined to see justice served. On the other side sat Clay's older children, who still believed their father was innocent. The prosecution presented the case step by step. The 911 call, the fake texts, the DNA, the diary entries, and the surveillance evidence. They showed how Clay had manipulated everyone around him, even his children. One of the most powerful moments came when Channon's diary was read aloud. In one entry, she wrote, "If something happens to me, look at Clay first." The courtroom fell silent. As the trial went on, Clay's defense team tried everything to plant doubt. They argued that the DNA evidence wasn't conclusive, that other men in Channon's life could have been responsible. They painted her as unstable, a woman who invited trouble through her dating choices, but the jury saw through it. The prosecution reminded them that Channon was not reckless. She was rebuilding her life. She was a mother, a student, a woman who wanted peace after years of emotional abuse, and the man who claimed to love her had turned her home into a place of fear. Forensic experts took the stand and described the evidence in painful detail. DNA under her nails, bruises consistent with the struggle, and phone records showing Clay's complete silence during the exact hours of her death. One detective said quietly on the stand, "It was like he vanished from the grid until she was gone." That silence, more than anything else, told the story. Clay's behavior after her death spoke volumes. He seemed detached, emotionless, even irritated that the investigation was disrupting his life. He told friends the police were wasting time, that crazy women get themselves into trouble. But the diary, the 911 call, and the DNA painted the real picture, one of control, anger, and revenge. In May 2013, the jury returned their verdict. Clay Starbuck was found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder.
Convicted killer Clay Starbuck gets life in prison without the possibility of parole. Last month, a jury convicted him of killing his ex-wife Channon and sexually violating her remains.
The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Channon's family wept. Her mother held her hands tightly together, whispering a prayer through tears. Across the room, Clay sat motionless, staring straight ahead. He didn't flinch, but the story didn't end in that courtroom. The years that followed were filled with pain, confusion, and division. Clay's older children, the ones who stood by their father, continued to believe he was innocent. They visited him in prison, defending him online, convinced the system had made a mistake. Meanwhile, Channon's family tried to heal. They worked to preserve her memory as a loving mother, a creative spirit, and a woman who deserved so much better. They spoke out about domestic abuse, about control, about the red flags people often overlook until it's too late. Because this case wasn't just about one murder. It was about the quiet danger that can hide behind closed doors. The warning signs were all there, the monitoring, the isolation, the fear she wrote about in her diary. But no one could stop what was coming. 10 years later, tragedy struck the Starbuck family again. In December 2021, Channon's child, Logan, the same boy who had waited for his mother at school that day, went missing. Weeks later, his body was found in the Spokane River. Authorities ruled his death a suicide. It was a heartbreaking reminder of how violence ripples far beyond the moment it happens. It shatters generations. For those who knew Channon, she wasn't just another victim. She was a mother who loved fiercely, a woman who tried to start over, and someone who trusted that the people closest to her would protect her, not destroy her. Her story forces us to ask a question that's as haunting as it is human. How well do we really know the people we love? Behind every smile, every routine, every "I'm fine," there could be a storm we never see coming, and sometimes it takes just 14 seconds, one unanswered call for help, to change everything forever. If you've made it this far, thank you for keeping Channon's memory alive. These stories are not just about tragedy. They're about awareness and the hope that by remembering, we can prevent another life from being taken too soon. If you want to help spread these stories, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe so more people can hear the voices of those who can't speak for themselves anymore. Because behind every case, there's a real person, and their story deserves to be told. This is the Untold Evidence, where the truth, no matter how dark, is always brought to light.